My name's Don Rippert, and I am Director of Market Operations here at Infinitive. The format of this conference is that we'll do a little bit of a presentation discussion. If you have questions, please put them into the chat, the conference chat, the Zoom chat. That chat, your questions will not be viewable by anybody but us. And as we get to the end, we'll go through the questions and answer them rather than break up the presentation overall. I'd like to introduce my two colleagues, Tiho Sherasharsky, who is a sales engineer. Wave to the people, Tiho. And Mike Sellery, one of our technical managers here at Infinitive. They went to reInvent, I did not. So unfortunately, being in charge of sales and marketing, I had to stay behind and work on some of the deals we're trying to close by the end of the year. And so I'm kind of in the same situation as the people who are joining to try to find out what happened here. And I'm going to open it up with a little bit of a high-level discussion, kind of what was your overall sense? What came through, what didn't come through in this AWS reInvent conference that was held just about 10 days ago. Mike, let's start with you. What were your observations?
So my name is Mike Sellery. I'm a director of cloud migration here at Infinitive. I've been working there for a few years, been in the AWS space for about 5 or 6 years. And yeah, this was my very first reInvent that I got to attend in person. Over the years, I'd watched some of the keynotes, maybe a couple other sessions live, but being there was a significant change and is absolutely worth it. The big takeaway compared to the more, haymaker announcements of the past that I took from this particular reInvent was that, yes, there were a lot of very flashy and exciting new services announced, but the tone was a little bit more iterative, more about maturity, refinement, and in a welcome change seemed to be more about getting back to AWS's original mission, which was, you let us worry about the work, you guys worry about your business. Everything seemed to be about making life easier, about taking these huge array of services that have been announced over the last couple of years and helping them tie together more seamlessly. And notably, it addressed a number of problems that we've experienced right with our own clients just in the last year. So I'll talk a little bit more in a bit, but the things I found most interesting weren't so much the big headliner announcements as some of the smaller ones that I think will be much more applicable to everybody's daily bread and butter when it comes to serving clients.
All right, so it sounds like in your opinion, AWS, there wasn't the big Aurora announcement, there wasn't the big announcement of a new data lake or something like that. Seems like philosophically, they believe they've got most of what they want in the platform. And now it's a matter of making the platform more integrated, easier to use, more automated, easier to scale. Is that kind of what you're saying there, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. It seemed to address a number of issues that have stemmed from having such a huge amount of offerings. And it is about getting back to making it easier to do what you do in your business and having to think about AWS and how to engineer it less.
All right, I know we'll get to some specifics in a minute, but Tiho, what's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you, Don. Quick intro. My name is Tihomir Cherasharsky. I'm a sales engineer with Infinitive. I've been with the company for about 2 years. And overall, I've worked with AWS products for, say, the past 7 years. To continue the trend that Mike was setting about, the vast array of services, I think this time AWS really did a nice job of explaining themselves to the world, right? So they gave all these examples about, space exploration and sea exploration, and they always tied that to the specific services that you might need, for innovation. So I think it helped me at least to put their, services into the broad categories that's how they see them. A lot of what you guys talked about is kind of resonated with me as well. I thought we saw a more mature AWS. Not as many flashy new announcements, although there were some. We'll get to them later, but lots of maturity in terms of their existing product line. We saw a lot of announcements about integrating their existing products or even opening up to the world. There were a few interesting announcements about new more or less SaaS applications. They announced, supply chain, that's something that they've used internally. They're opening that up to the world now. They continue to make investments in apps like Amazon Connect, which is another app that it originated internally to quickly stand up support center. So it seems they may be moving up the stack a little bit and not just focusing on commodity infrastructure. So yeah, better integrations, moving up the stack, and I think, Don, the overarching theme was data and facilitating folks and companies to really harness the power of their data to their tools.
All right, so we've divided up these announcements into 4 categories, at least the ones that we considered, the areas we consider to be most important to the customers. Data and analytics is 1, compute is 2, AI, ML is 3, and management tools is 4. So Tiho, why don't you take us through what was discussed, what was announced, and what impact it has on our customers for data and analytics?
Yeah, so I think the overall theme there was, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but this was really what the focus of all these analytics announcements were. A lot of integrations between their own ecosystem, removing steps from the ETL process, extract, transform, and load, faster data movement from one environment to another. And to give you more context, they talk about enabling companies, and this is kind of the business of enabling companies to build a strong data strategy, which they categorize with 3 pillars. Number 1, a future-proof data foundation, or in other words, putting in the right architecture, the right tools, the right highly available solution, a solution that doesn't need re-architecting 12, 18, 24 months from now when your use cases dramatically change. Number 2 was creating connective tissues, or the ability to move data, to connect data, to break silos, to move data from storage systems to compute systems to processing systems easily. And then number 3, as part of strong data strategy, they emphasize democratizing data and providing the right self-service tools and the right no-code or low-code tools to their clients. And you will see that a lot of the services that I'm going to announce right now kind of fall within 1 or 2 of these, or maybe all of these categories. So to start with, I'm going to give you a few Redshift announcements. Redshift was front and center of their analytics announcements. They have introduced faster and easier ingestion methods into Redshift, data ingestion methods. Let me give you a few. Redshift and Aurora integration. They talked a lot about zero ETL, or the ability to move data from one place to another with minimal effort. So, let's say that you're using Aurora for transactional database, you're using Redshift for your analytics warehouse. There's a backend integration that now, as soon as data arrives, new transactional updates get to Aurora, you can transfer that data easily to Redshift, and that's all taken care of in the background. And the benefit of that really for clients is that if you guys are using Redshift and Aurora, that eliminates an extra pipeline, right? A custom pipeline. Data makes its way to the analytics system and ultimately your reporting systems or downstream to other applications to APIs much faster. There was a few similar announcements like that. They automated the copy command from S3 to Redshift. So to get data into Redshift from S3, which is what a lot of Redshift customers do, you need to run a copy procedure, right? So that's now being taken care of in the background as well. You can now stream data into Redshift using Kafka and Kinesis directly into Redshift versus staging that on S3 first. They opened up a connector. They actually created a connector for Spark jobs. You can now, again, run Spark jobs directly on Redshift data versus using third-party connectors or offloading the data to S3. So all of that is the elimination of an extra step in the ETL process. Getting to your data faster, getting to your insights faster. That's the benefit. If you guys are Redshift users, take a look at some of these announcements because there may be a benefit. Moving away from Redshift, a few other interesting announcements. Amazon Athena for Apache Spark. You can now run Spark jobs ad hoc Spark jobs directly in Athena. Athena is one of Amazon's most widely used and adopted services. It's for ad hoc queries for data that sits on S3. So now if you have Spark applications, you don't need to provision a dedicated EMR cluster and run ad hoc queries. You can just use the Athena console. There is a Jupyter notebook that they've integrated there, and you can run ad hoc queries against data for parallel processing directly on your S3. So integration, I mentioned that. AppFlow is one of their integration services, and it allows you to bring data from many of the most popular SaaS applications. So they announced over 22 new connectors to things like Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn. And so where that helps is really around your 360 view of your operations, of your customer. It helps you to really bring in data easily. Again, no custom pipelines. It's a native connector that connects to all of these SaaS applications, brings data in. So I think that is nice. And one of the big announcements also to move on was around Amazon Data Zone. And it's still in preview, but I'm personally very excited about that because, when talking to customers, I think that's a feature that many of our customers, anybody basically could benefit from. And it's like a data catalog. It's a unified data management system with a web interface where data producers, let's say application owners or admins or data stewards, can share data with data consumers in a single hub, in a single zone. Not everything is an ad hoc request. I can go and I can add my data there through the interface. I can share it. I can use fine-grained control access. I can define the taxonomy. They added some ML features of transforming some of the fields that go in there. So it's that central hub where you can go and publish your data, and then the data consumer can go in and search a catalog literally to find data sets that they may be interested in, and they can subscribe to those data sets. So that is a neat feature. I'm really excited about that one and waiting to experiment with it myself. And maybe a couple of other ones, and the last ones from me on analytics. QuickSight Q. QuickSight Q came out about 2 years ago, and it's a natural language processing feature where I can go and type questions within QuickSight. And they added forecasting and why questions. So now I can go directly to QuickSight and I can ask a question of, show me revenue, show me the forecast of revenue for the next 6 months or the next 9 months. And you can do up to 3 metrics at a time. And QuickSight's going to give you a forecast, an ML-powered forecast, whereas before, you would need to probably have a machine learning model, a custom machine learning model to do all of that. Or at the very minimum, you'd have to go to someone else on the team, a data analyst, a data engineer, a data scientist for that information. So now you can ask directly in the console, in the QuickSight console, and it's going to give you that. And then the why question, right? So why did enrollment decrease for the past 6 months, past 9 months? And it will give you the drivers, give you the top 3 or 4 drivers. So again, that elimination of that extra step of going outside your team to get that information. And then the last one, Don, is data clean rooms. Again, another indication that maybe they're moving up the stack a little bit and offering solutions that are more SaaS oriented. Data clean rooms is something that's kind of near and dear to me and to us. It's a very useful tool for media publishers and media and brands and advertisers, but also it has applications in healthcare and other sectors as well. It's for exchanging safely first-party data. And the business value there is that AWS opening that capability. Many companies are now natively going to be able to do that data exchange right there and then within the AWS ecosystem. We know that tools like Snowflake and Databricks and others, they already have that capability. So it's nice to see that AWS moving into that space. I like the presentation and the demo that they was shown. It's a web interface. It's fairly straightforward to follow the steps to create the connections between the two parties. So yeah, it's still in preview, so I can't wait to see more around that. But that's the overarching. That's the bulk of the messages that I thought would be interesting.
Well, that sounds good, Tio. I guess what I'm hearing from a customer benefit perspective is first taking out some of the low value labor that's required just to move data from one platform to another within AWS. A second is to speed up the timing by which the data gets into the analytical engine so that you get more real-time analysis and there's not a delay. And third, implementing a more collaborative environment, kind of AWS recognizing that it's not an individual data scientist or an individual developer that works on these things. It's teams of people, and they've got to be able to connect the teams together in order to make the entirety more productive. And so a good thing I should have mentioned earlier that this is being recorded, a replay will be available, and that we will send out to all registrants a written summary of our points here in an email. Mike, let's talk about compute. What's new there?
Yeah, so compute was a little bit of a different theme than everything else we've kind of talked about here. The good news is you've probably all heard the old joke, better, faster, cheaper, pick two. Compute continues to let you have all three in terms of the announcements they made here. But before I cover them, I want to spend a little bit of time about why compute still matters. As cloud engineers, most people tend to get really excited about pushing in all the way, right? And they want to get into all the managed services, make everything serverless, and just be done with servers. But the ground reality is that compute is still extremely important. In fact, many analysts still consider it a growth market. And certainly the experience we've had migrating customers, we come to find out that when you take a look at, say, an on-prem database and say, well, I'll just move this to RDS, right? That's the first plan of attack. There tends to be more things in the fine print than engineers might originally realize about why that doesn't always work. So for instance, we recently helped a client that had an extremely aggressive evacuation schedule that they had to get their on-prem. And when we looked at moving SQL Server, for example, come to find out they used a feature called file stream that disqualifies use of the RDS style of SQL Server. So that cluster had to get migrated into compute instances. And things like that, particularly, not to call them out too bad, but particularly with Microsoft products, tend to come up a lot. And we found that there's still a significant amount of cases where compute and the instances available to you still matter. So in terms of their announcements, like I said, most things were about being better, faster, and cheaper. The Graviton 3 series of CPU instances is out now, and I've always thought that's a particularly interesting instance type. The hype looks really great, right? Like even the Graviton 2 was significantly faster, cheaper to operate than most EC2 instances. Graviton 3 series is even better and faster still. So that's the really good news. The less good news is, it's still not a terribly compatible instance type. You can't run Microsoft Windows on it at all. Whether that's going to change, I can't say at this juncture, but if you look at some of the competing offers in Azure, they've kind of got their own thing now with the Ampere system. So on jury's kind of out on whether that bridge will ever be crossed. So you have a lot of announcements on that end. You also have a lot of announcements on the extreme computing end, the ultra high performance, high compute side of things. Instances to make networking performance more robust, instances to make cluster operations more robust, things of that nature. So the other development, though, that I did find interesting is, so where most things we talked about making life easier, making best practice the default operation out of the box. So I thought it was noteworthy that last year there were about 500 different instance types within AWS, and now there are over 600. And being able to select the best one, there's certainly guides out there, but even just clicking around some of the most recent white papers, for a lot of times the guidance still comes down to, it's a trial and error sort of thing, right? You got to play around, see what might be the best. And I feel like there's an opportunity for AWS to make it a little bit easier for people, particularly novice users, to go in and decide what the best EC2 instance for them is. However, a couple other points in that area, they did have some announcement for container services to try to make ECS integrate better into some of the other offerings within AWS. And one development that I thought was interesting, and they called it a compute announcement, but regarding some of the new features in Lambda. So probably the most exciting announcement in that whole area was the new Snap Start feature, particularly for Java developers. So this area is a little bit outside of my expertise, but they were part of the most interesting session that I did end up attending about how they can redo the initialization sequence of Lambda now, that for most Java implementations can be reduced by almost 50%. And, it was a pretty bold claim, but they put up a lot of supporting information up there. They basically suspend the initialization sequence in memory so that it's constantly available instead of having to restart every time, which the stats behind that looked very impressive. So compute is still very important. It's unfortunate that there's less support for some of the Microsoft instances that might come online. They did have some announcements around scalable Xeon processors, sounded a little bit more iterative to me. But in our experience, it's usually Microsoft products that end up having to go into compute instances. So it'll be interesting to see how AWS tries to bridge that gap to make migration to AWS a little bit easier.
Interesting. So an open point is the kind of cooperation or lack thereof between two tech behemoths that compete with each other in cloud. And, we'll see if they bridge the gap. On AI and ML, I mean, just a little bit of a setup there. If you went and looked at the cloud-based AI tools Gartner matrix, the Magic Quadrant matrix, in 2020, AWS was the clear leader. In 2021, Google, Microsoft, and IBM began closing the gap. And this year, 2022, for AI and ML tools from cloud providers, AWS was just part of the pack. Now, in fairness, they're all four in that Magic Quadrant of leaders. Absolutely. But the relative position of AWS had gone back a bit when Gartner published the matrix back in June. So TO, AI and ML, it had to be an area of interest for the conference. What are they doing? Where are they going? Are they trying to close that gap?
It seems that way. There was a lot of announcements about AI and ML and new features, particularly in SageMaker. But let me give you some context, maybe why SageMaker was kind of front and center. The very first session I walked into on AI and ML, I think it was the leadership session. They categorize their AI and ML services into three different layers, and I knew all of these services, but it really helped me to put them in my mind in that category. It made more sense, even from a business perspective. So they said, bottom layer is where you've got all the infrastructure. So you've got EC2 machines that Mike was talking about, EC2 and compute. You have EC2 machines with specific GPUs, right? So, or PyTorch and TensorFlow and things, hardware and software that you may need to build your own machine learning practice. And that's for customers with very custom, specialized need around machine learning. The middle layer is where I don't care about the infrastructure. I just want to manage service. I want to deploy. I want to train. I want to build my models efficiently. And I just want a tool to do that. And that's where SageMaker is. And then the top layer is all the AI services that address a specific use case and that are backed by machine learning logic or a model. So that's your AWS personalized, that's comprehend, things that you can either use directly in an interface or using your application by calling an API and using it for a specific use case. And the majority of clients that are doing machine learning kind of fall in that middle layer, which is where SageMaker is. And that's why most of the features announced were all around SageMaker. And they even gave an analogy, not an analogy, but a fun a fact that I thought interesting that since 2019, the sophistication and complexity of machine learning models has increased 1,600 times if you measure it by one of the key measures they say for complexity of machine learning models, which is parameters used. So there are 1,600 more parameters used in machine learning models nowadays versus only 3 years ago. What does that mean? It means that many more users are getting their hands on machine learning, that machine learning is now being at scale. And that was the overall theme. AWS wants to enable machine learning at scale. Everything, all the announcements were around accelerating data prep, helping with modeling, training and debugging, monitoring models while they're deployed, and lots of improvements and announcements around governance, collaboration, and accessibility. While machine learning and maybe SageMaker was maybe niche just a few years ago, and only a few people in an organization were doing that. The claim is that many more people are doing that right now. So therefore, that necessitates better governance, better collaboration, and really that offering becoming more of a platform with different features. So to give you a couple of examples, they introduce Role Manager in SageMaker. That's an admin tool to control access and improve governance, set minimum permissions, etc. Model cards. That's a single hub where you can document and store information about models. And you can share that with users. You've got model dashboard, which is a central dashboard for monitoring the health of your models once you deploy them. A lot of focus was spent on geospatial capabilities that are now available in SageMaker. That, for anybody that uses satellite imagery or latitude and longitude data, and wants to build machine learning using that data, that's a plus. And maybe one or two other quick announcements around machine learning. They introduced a tool called Amazon Code Whisperer. Again, this is another tool that they developed in-house, is used currently by their developers. Code Whisperer is a developer assistant tool that looks at the code that you're typing live, looks at the libraries, looks at some of the comments that you're making, and auto suggests and auto fills the code that it thinks that you're trying to write. Another one, which is maybe pertains to the financial sector, is a new feature around Amazon Textract. And it's about classifying and extracting mortgage loan data. Maybe with the current interest rates, that's something that's not going to be used very often nowadays, but maybe with time it's going to be. But it's a specific use case that helps financial institutions to process loan and mortgage applications much quicker. It's something that came out of the financial industry as a request, as an enhancement request. It was delivered. And Don, the last one, which kind of falls outside of AI and ML, but I do want to touch on it because I think it's a very practical update. It's on databases, and it's blue-green deployment for RDS. The blue-green deployment, it's a technique used to minimize downtime when you do upgrades, patching on RDS. That's a very practical feature. You basically need two environments: the current environment, your blue environment, your production environment, and then you have a complete replica, which is a green environment. So you can apply all your patches, upgrades, updates on the green environment, and then test it out, and then gradually transfer traffic through load balancing and routing to that environment. So it doesn't necessitate a full stack of services on RDS, and then doing the patching or update, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, but it's a downtime. And it's really useful feature for anybody with low RTO, recovery time objectives, or with low availability SLAs that you can allow for it's for highly available applications. So that's a neat little announcement there.
All right, well, great. I mean, what I'm hearing, I think, is the theme of automate, integrate, collaborate. that they pushed a lot of that today, a lot of that in these announcements. They automated the data pipelines, you know, they integrated some of the capabilities in SageMaker, and they provide collaboration for teams to work not just on analytics, but also on AI models. Mike, does that theme continue over to the management tools?
A little bit. So the management tools, I might describe the theme more as best practice by default, and make it easy to pick what you want to do and move on. So, again, I just want to start by talking about why these are important. Why would we pick management, something as benign as management tools to be in a highlight for what we thought was important here? The short answer is they are tools that should be being used by every single AWS production customer. And these are things that when we bring somebody in for a cloud migration, this is one of the very first things we do is sit down and say, all right, how can we use Control Tower? How can we set you up with a landing zone? How can we set you up from the start in a best practice, secure fashion so that you can grow into a system that makes sense no matter what scale you end up working at? So, these are tools near and dear to my heart because these are some of the first things we use when we do bring a client in. But at least in years past, they've still had a few gaps that I'll talk about here in a minute. So, for example, we had one client that had used extensive organizational unit structure. They had extensive service control policies, and they had brought in a bunch of professional outside help to set up those policies to try to prevent behaviors that they did not want to see certain people doing in their system. But over the months, it turned out things were still happening. Things that were explicitly told from the top, we do not want to see this behavior, that they'd spent all this money on to try to prevent. Things were still happening. And so one of the first tasks they had Infinitive look at when we got in there was, why is this happening? How can we stop it? And short answer, it ended up being that when you look at all these nested SCPs in the current Control Tower OU structure, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. And to really have a bead on what's really going on and who's really permitted to do what, you still have to end up doing a lot of manual tracing of what ends up being basically a software development project in its own right. And this is kind of where I get excited to see that, yes, this has been a reinvent, more about stopping back and getting a breath and saying, hey, let's step back and get back to what we originally tried to offer was, let us take care of the work. Everybody else take care of their business. So with Control Tower, the big announcement there was their comprehensive controls management feature. And what I really like about this is it turns what used to be a very complex policy statement exercise into something that's almost as easy as ordering fast food from your favorite takeout joint, right? They've taken very common controls and behaviors that people want to see. They've listed their descriptions in extremely easy to read language. And it's as simple as check, yes, I want this, and check, yes, I want it applied here. Things like, yes, I want encryption at rest. Yes, I want logging enforced. Yes, I want this DynamoDB policy, applied to this table, whatever. And I really like that approach because 9 times out of 10, these sort of basic out of the box secure behaviors are what you want to implement. And you want to have confidence that they've been implemented and are doing what you think they are doing, because that's something we have not seen to be the case in the field. And actually, if I can, I think it's worth looking at this real quick. I was going to go ahead and share this out. So just to show you that it's not only policy statements, but also entire frameworks, right? If you have some of these framework requirements for some of your OUs, they're literally listed and ready to go, that you could apply them directly to your OUs. Just an example of how easy it is to read the screen on some of the other controls. Here's API gateway, establish logging and monitoring. Very clear, no ambiguity, a lot more confidence that it's going to enforce what you expect it to enforce. Here's the same thing for DynamoDB, encrypting data at rest, requiring point-in-time recovery, right? What it's for. And this is just going to really make it a lot easier to give clients the confidence that they're operating in a best practice environment, getting all the controls that they expect to have.
So Mike,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. So that means that I don't have to write anymore, like complex JSON, deny, allow, and all that kind of stuff.
You still certainly can, right? They're not taking that away, but they're making it, you don't have to do nearly as much, and you shouldn't have to do as many mental gymnastics to try to figure out what's applying to all your OUs. So again, like, doesn't sound very sexy on the surface, but every single production customer out there should be using these things. You should be using Control Tower. You should be separating your accounts. You should be using OUs. And at least in our experience, it really can get out of hand really fast. So I thought this was one of the much more interesting announcements. Kind of in that vein with the monitoring tools, they sort of have a checkbox a la carte way now to censor out sensitive data out of the CloudWatch logs. And when they first announced this, I kind of thought the same thing. Oh, great, I'm going to have to come up with a bunch of complex, excuse me, string processing stuff to identify social security numbers or credit cards or whatever I consider sensitive. But again, it came with a nice list of very typical things that you can check, and keep those things out of your log files. So that attitude, that philosophy of let's give people the option to do common sense things easily. If they need to do what Tiho's talking about, they still have special cases. They want to write all their JSON and have very complex use cases, still there. But the average engineer no longer has to do that. So I thought that was really interesting to finally see that change of philosophy, getting back more to doing it right out of the box most easily.
Well, it sounds like that kind of falls from the integrate, automate, collaborate. It sounds kind of like the automate, that rather than writing these long scripts, you end up checkboxing it. Did it include anything to kind of reduce or control the cost of cloud? Anything that would shut down services after a period when they're not being used? Things like that, or is that kind of left open?
I didn't see, I personally did not see any new announcements in that space. That is something that, yes, is still takes a little bit of elbow work from time to time, but there may have been something in the hundreds of sessions out there about that, but I did not personally see it.
All right, well, those are the four categories that we wanted to go through, because those were the four categories where we thought the most significant and customer impacting announcements came. Again, I keep coming back to the integrate, automate, collaborate. They're really tying together their platform. And one of the questions in my mind is, well, what didn't get announced? Mike, you already hit one bit of it. They didn't announce significant improvements in support for Microsoft-based products, at least not in their compute environment. I don't hear a lot of announcements about observability. I don't hear a lot about, which is a hot topic now. I guess they've decided that companies like Datadog that have fabulous products, they can handle that without AWS having to have their own capabilities. I didn't hear a lot about Outposts. I didn't hear a lot about IoT, other than, as Tio said, some of the geospatial data could well be applicable to an IoT type of environment with different devices out in the field. So I guess what'll be interesting is to see where they go from here. Always interesting with AWS. But this reInvent seemed like more of a very important kind of, instead of having the services sprawl, they're now trying to connect it together and make it more of a fabric, more of a fabric as viewed by the users. So Tammy, I think we can go to questions now. Do you have any, do we get any questions?
We have one so far. What would you consider to be the impact of AWS's clean room announcement?
All right, I'll start there. Right, so clean rooms they're being driven by a number of business events. The first of which is the death of cookies. I mean, people who make browsers are beginning to allow users to turn off cookies, and they're eventually going to just not allow cookies, which was the way of identifying individuals that came to your website again. They were a pivotal part of advertising. The data privacy regulations that govern how much data you can share are changing daily. There's California, Virginia, now Colorado has one, GDPR in Europe, and they're not standardized. So if you're going to share private data, then you have to do it according to the regulations. If you're going to track customers, you can't use cookies, all of which has meant that the first party data, the data that you collect and you own and you have a right to, gets to be more and more important and more valuable. And a number of places, Snowflake, Databricks, Infosum, have worked hard to create an environment where it's easy to share first-party data to get around the decline in cookies while staying within the regulations. And it's almost a managed service for data. And I think Amazon believes, hey, this is kind of a table stakes. This is like infrastructure plus. If you have your first-party data in AWS, then they should provide you with a way of sharing that data according to the regulations, within the regulations. And, you know, I see this as a pretty important step forward for them. I know it's just announced, it's not in GA yet, but I expect it will be. And I think that, you know, the final kind of addendum to this from a business perspective was COVID. You know, people are beginning to realize they can monetize their first-party data. Who went to a supermarket's website before COVID? Why would you go there? What are you doing? You're looking for specials on apples? I mean, people didn't do it. You went to the store that was close to you. Once you started getting curbside pickup, once you started getting order and delivery of groceries, then you started going to those websites all the time, which meant that the grocer was now collecting a lot of first-party data and had enough eyeballs, to go back to an old term, to begin to put advertisements on their own website, which means they need somebody else's first-party data. So I think the whole clean room business concept is around monetizing, protecting, connecting, and monetizing the first-party data of companies that are on AWS already. You know, so you don't have to create a separate standalone structure to be able to handle the first-party data. I mean, that's my take. Tio or Mike, I don't know if you guys have any takes on that.
I mean, I think you hit the right points there in terms of business value. I'm excited to see this new release. Again, it's going to make it easier for people that are already on AWS to share data securely. You can just to give more of what I learned, you can share with up to 5 accounts. It's a fairly straightforward process of setting up the connection or the collaboration between accounts. Where the art, if you wish, comes is really first of all understanding and collecting your first-party data and making connections between it, and knowing what exactly is a value of sharing, but also getting from your partners. I think that's where, and that monetization piece. The clean room is great. It's a mechanism, but the collection piece and then the monetization piece that go in between those, the collaboration, are super critical. So yeah, let's see. It's an exciting one.
Yeah, and you wonder if there's a day coming where AWS will be one of the repositories for first-party data for sale within regulations. So I've got first-party data, I put it into their clean room, somebody else uses that data, AWS charges them, pays me, maintains the connection, and I make money off my data without too much effort on my part. And I think that's coming. There are companies that are trying to do that already, OpenAP being one. And I wonder about Amazon going forward with that. So looking forward to reInvent 2023, kind of some questions on my mind would be, do they continue to move into the application area? They've moved into supply chain. Tiho, you talked about the specific processes they have available to extract information from mortgages. We talked about clean rooms. I mean, should SAP be quaking in their boots and worried that AWS is going to go into it? Should Oracle or Microsoft Dynamics worry about that? I think it's an open question. Certainly AWS has a ton of ambition, and there's no end to what they will try to do if they think they can provide good product and make a profit doing it. So Tammy, if there are no more questions, we'll wrap it up.
We have 2 more.
2 more, okay.
First one is, I heard Datadog had a pretty big presence at reInvent. In your opinion, is it the preferred observability tool, and how do your clients use it?
Well, preferred by whom, I guess, is the question. I think Datadog is a great platform, and I think it is. And again, if you look at observability on the Gartner quadrants and you look at 2020, 2021, 2022, you notice many of the same kind of companies like Dynatrace up there, but you see an almost meteoric rise of Datadog to the upper right-hand side of that quadrant. So if you look at Datadog's, financial results, you see that they're being bought at scale. If you go to their conference, which I did attend, you'll see that they're adding a lot of capabilities to go from being more of an application performance monitoring company to being a platform for cloud operations. So I do think that, they're certainly the fastest rising observability platform. I personally think that they are probably in the lead right now. They certainly have some competitors, New Relic, Dynatrace, et cetera, but they seem to have the momentum. And I think it's interesting that AWS either accords them so much respect that they're not trying to produce something like it. At least they haven't announced anything that would kind of tie together all of their monitoring and observability. So yeah, I mean, I'm very bullish personally. Infinitive is very bullish on Datadog. They have tremendous momentum. They solve a lot of problems. If you don't pay attention, they'll announce 3 things that you didn't know about. So they are really moving fast. And I think it's a compliment to them that you don't see AWS trying to get into that, because I think that's a measure of AWS's respect for the observability providers in general and for Datadog in particular.
Last question is, what advice would you give to somebody going to AWS for the first time next year?
Well, I'll let the guys who went for the first time this year talk about that.
We can talk about that for a little bit. It was so I mean, first of all, it was a great experience. On a personal note, reports say that there were over 50,000 people. The whole place was hustling and bustling. I mean, the energy, the whole dynamic of meeting with new people, meeting with customers, with prospects, going to the sessions, staying then I'll tell you, the moment, those 10 or 15 minutes after a session, when those small groups of people form around the speaker, and then you start asking questions that they didn't cover, and you learn how others are doing things. People start sharing how they do things in their companies. This is the invaluable experience that you get from being there live. I can watch it on my screen on YouTube. All the sessions are now available, but trust me, it's not the same. Very productive for me. The one thing I will say and advise to others, when you set up your agenda, needless to say, you have to get on as soon as they release the sessions, get on them and start registering. But if you don't get to register for a session, don't panic. Typically, they do overflows, and if you miss the session, likelihood is they're going to repeat it somewhere else in another venue. And the other thing is, I made a mistake. First time going to reInvent, I made a mistake. I booked something at 10:30 at the MGM, and then I had to move at 11:30 or 12 to the Venetian. Then I had to go to the Palazzo. So it was all over the place. And I quickly realized that that's not going to happen. You better be prepared to walk. They had buses, but you still need 30-40 minutes to get from place to place. So when you schedule it, make sure you spend maybe half day here, maybe move for the latter half of the day somewhere else, or nothing wrong staying at the same place. And even if you miss the session that you registered for, trust me, there's over 2,000 sessions. There were a lot of ad hoc sessions that you can attend. If you miss a session, you don't make it. As a matter of fact, the one that I found most valuable was around data governance. A financial company basically showcased how they built a fully automated data governance, data onboarding tool. I thought that was the best, hands down, the best presentation. So yeah, plan your sessions well, and logistics. That's my advice to people.
Mike, anything from you?
Yeah, I would add, keep a very open mind about what you sign up for with regards to your sessions. Tio's absolutely right. The conference is enormous, and if I am lucky enough to go back next year, Unless there's a session that is overwhelmingly compelling for something that you just are dying to see, I would start more with what's available in your local hotel, because one of the experiences I had was one of the sessions that I was most looking forward to, unfortunately ended up being a little bit of a bust due to some technical concerns. And a session that I registered for just as sort of a throwaway, what am I going to do during this hour? Well, I guess I'll go to this one. That actually ended up being the very best session I attended. And also on that note, I would actually lean towards the sessions that are offered with third-party partners. I originally wanted to avoid them. I thought, oh, that's just going to be a commercial for so-and-so, why would I want to go there? I actually found them to be far more useful because they're much more real. It's usually a vendor or a partner getting on stage and being very candid and saying, these were the problems we had. This is why this feature that was so hyped 2-3 years ago actually didn't end up working out. And this is why we are so excited about this new announcement that is solving all these problems that we didn't even know we had. So I enjoyed that more candidness, that more real world experience tales than necessarily just a very dry, here's the press release for this new thing. So wherever you end up, I would start there, save your energy, because it's a very energy intensive event, but very much worth going.
All right, and I'll add two. One, stop by the Infinitive booth. We're a sponsor, and we'll be a sponsor next year. So if you're out there, come see us. And two, sign up for the Infinitive Happy Hour, which we sponsored this year and we'll sponsor again next year. Like Tio said, a lot of what gets done live as opposed to virtual is the collaboration and communication among the participants there. And our happy hour is a good venue for that kind of collaboration. So let's wrap it up here. If there are no more questions, I appreciate everybody's attendance. Thank you very much for coming to our webinar. Hope you enjoyed it. We will send out a written summary of our points. And thank you very much. Have a nice day.